We've hit the midway point of training camp where things start to get a little juicy. Like today, the Rams making the trip to Oxnard for joint practice and a scrimmage with the Dallas Cowboys. And like our generation likes to say, it gave what it needed to give today here in Oxnard, California. Welcome into Inside Cowboys training camp presented by Ford. Nicole Hutchison alongside Kyle Youmans. And Kyle, I've got to start with this. I mean, what stood out to you the most?
Well, I think it was the competition. I think it was the way that these two teams went after it because you had both fields going at the same time and you had both teamworks going at the same time. I really liked the fact that they went into second, third down scenarios. They were able to work into the red zone too. I mean, of course, whenever you have a guy like Matthew Stafford who's won a Super Bowl before, you've thrown the football to Cooper Kupp, it's going to test your defense. Mike Zimmer had a lot of reps today as a coach, as a play caller that he hasn't had in a couple of years since he was the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. So I really liked the back and forth, the competition element of today's joint practice, and I like the fact that for the most part, everybody walked out healthy. That's always a key in these practices. You got to walk out healthy, and you got to be able to move on with your camp specifically, and that's both for the Rams and for the Cowboys. I think both teams came out of today with something to prove.
Healthy is actually one of the best things, right? But I think another thing that the Cowboys have really emphasized this offseason and in training camp is the red zone, right? They were ranked 30th in the NFL in 2023 in the ability to get in the red zone. What has impressed you about that so far?
Well, I think the work that they've gotten in the red zone has been significant because not only are you utilizing Dak Prescott, who is a red zone weapon in his own right, but you're utilizing these tight ends, Jake Ferguson, Luke Schoonmaker, who was limited but back in the fold a little bit. I really like what I've seen from John Stevens Jr. and his return from injury as well. So the red zone was always a question mark. It hasn't been at the top of the league since Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator, and while Mike McCarthy brought a number of things to another level as the play caller in 2023, that was one area where there was a bit of a lapse. So I want to see more of the red zone, and I think Mike McCarthy knows that too. I think he's said that in his press conferences at least 2 or 3 times throughout training camp. Red zone will be an emphasis, and as long as they continue to have some success like they did today against the Rams, like they have throughout training camp versus offense, defense in those team drills, I think they're moving in the right direction.
This offense is certainly making the strides they need to make, but this defense is as well. How about Caelen Carson lighting things up in that secondary? We're talking about him coming up next.
Inside Cowboys Training Camp, presented by Ford, is brought to you by AT&T, official sponsor of the Dallas Cowboys. Sleep Number, the official sleep and wellness partner of the Dallas Cowboys. And by your North Texas Ford dealers. Ford is the best in Texas. This segment is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, official sporting goods retailer of the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, the Cowboys have certainly found the blueprint in drafting corners. They did it in 2020 with Trayvon Diggs, right, in the second round. They also did it in 2022 with Deron Bland. But they're hoping they found another gem in Caelen Carson, who was drafted in the 2024 draft. And they're looking for him to really be big this year. How about Al Harris having some good things to say about Caelen Carson? Let's take a listen.
But knew coming in that this kid was going to be raw, but extremely talented. And he's doing a great job picking up the coaching points, competing, and, he's a joy to coach.
What do you like most about him at this stage? Just the competitive fire in him, or is there some technique he's got to catch up on? How would you assess that?
I like the blank canvas. When you a lot of times when you get older guys, you kind of have to break them out of bad habits or tolerate bad habits. When you get the younger guys, the newer guys who are talented, but not to throw stones or anything at their coaches, but just haven't been taught the things that they're being taught here. That's what I like about it. He listens and he does what you ask him to do and goes from there.
Al Harris mentioning one thing in that soundbite that stood out to me was that Caelen Carson is coachable. What have you seen so far in just the few months that he's been here and how he's kind of grown so far as a player?
Well, it's that coachability, right? Yeah. It's the way that he's taken steps forward because he was always a playmaker at Wake Forest. That was the number one thing on the scouting report. He always had a nose for the football. He was really good on the boundary, and he had fluid hips. And if you don't know what that necessarily means from a scouting report standpoint, it basically means you're flexible and you can change direction really quickly. And that's exactly what we've seen throughout training camp. I like the way that Caelen Carson has stepped into that boundary role, and he's really taken on guys like a Nashawn Wright at the second level, like Eric Scott Jr., who both have something to prove at the cornerback spot. But Caelen Carson has a leg up, not only because he is younger, but because he was a draft pick. And of course, this Cowboys team does like to hold on to their draft picks as long as humanly possible. So this is a chance for Caelen Carson to elevate not only into the first team at some point, if there were something to happen with some of those starters, but to be in the rotation period and to earn special team snaps, to be on that 53-man roster. He is moving in the right direction. He's been really fun to watch.
Do you see some similarities between Caelen Carson and maybe a Trayvon Diggs?
I think more so, I think I would maybe put it on Deron Bland a little bit differently, because Trayvon Diggs has always been a shutdown corner. Sure, he's a ball hawk, and sure, he can have the interceptions. He had 11 of them in 2022. I think they fit better with Deron Bland in that maybe inside-out game. Trayvon Diggs is always going to be a boundary corner. I think at times there will be only boundary corner snaps for Caelen Carson, but I would love to move him inside. He's a little bit shorter than Trayvon Diggs. He's got that long, lanky wingspan to kind of work in his favor. I think out of those two guys, I would maybe compare him a little bit more to Deron than I would to Trayvon. Trayvon's an elite corner. Deron's trending in that direction as well. I hope that Caelen Carson can get there too.
Caelen Carson certainly turned some heads in training camp so far. Looking to make a big year out of his rookie year, but how about that year 2 jump? We talk about it all the time. Eric Scott, well, maybe I'll name it a big 37 jump. How about Eric Scott? We're talking about him coming up right here on Inside Cowboys Training Camp.
This segment was brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, official sporting goods retailer of the Dallas Cowboys.
We're here to wrap things up on Inside Cowboys Training Camp, presented by Ford. Nicole Hutchison and Kyle Youmans. And Kyle, we've talked Caelen Carson, but we've got to talk about Eric Scott as well, right? He's a guy that many people weren't really impressed about the fact that, the 2023 draft class didn't do much production in 2023. But Eric Scott is certainly looking to take a big jump in year 2. What have you seen so far from him?
Well, I've seen him get better too. And we just talked about Caelen Carson in that last segment. I think while Carson's probably been the more impressive of the two, Eric Scott Jr. has taken on that challenge because he's seen what Carson's doing. He's seen what some of these younger guys are doing, and it's pushing him forward. I think his best practice of training camp came in the padded practice on Tuesday. I think he upped it again on Thursday, had a good rep or two against the Los Angeles Rams. So the way that Eric Scott Jr. continues to press forward is going to put him in position to maybe get those special team snaps. Same thing we talked about with Caelen Carson, and to try and be in that rotation. There's still a long way to go with Eric Scott Jr. I think he's moving in the right direction. The one thing with him is he cannot be susceptible to the big play. It's happened a ton of times in camp so far. You look up on Twitter, or X as they call it these days, and you have all these different highlights. There's a lot of times that Eric Scott Jr. is not on the right side of those highlights. Well, he's starting to stack some wins. He's starting to stack some highlights of his own, and that's going to push him forward.
You talked about special teams. How pivotal is it for him to really stand out on special teams?
It's extremely important. And of course, with the new kickoff rules too, where you're starting closer together and you've got to be more concise in your special team skills, he's going to have a big role to play in the preseason, and he'll certainly be on tape with that as well.
Well, he'll have a chance to show that this Sunday. Kickoff is at 3 o'clock with the Rams. Make sure to tune in on CBS. We'll have all your training camp live coverage continue through practice tomorrow. We'll be back with Inside Cowboys Training Camp.
Inside Cowboys Training Camp, presented by Ford, was brought to you by AT&T, official sponsor of the Dallas Cowboys. Sleep Number, the official sleep and wellness partner of the Dallas Cowboys. And by your North Texas Ford dealers. Ford is the best in Texas.